Alright, it is time for tutorial number 5. Thank you very much for tuning in so far. This is going to be a productive one. Now last time we talked about extruding, and I very purposely chose to extrude the top face, as it is the simplest to understand, and has the least that can go wrong. To show you what I mean, let's first get back to our default cube. Only, instead of deleting the whole thing and starting over, I'm going to select the top face loop, which is the ring of faces formed at the top of the shape extending as far down as our edge loop, right here. I haven't moved this, but if you have moved or distorted it in any way like we did in the last tutorial, then I encourage you to either undo until you get back to this point, or recreate the setup of the new cube. Remember, we took the top face of the default cube and extruded it up one. And we'll see. I know it's silly, I told you to experiment and all that, but the practice and the learning is worth it. I bet you can recreate it super fast. We can delete the geometry we added by first entering face select mode by pressing 3 and holding down Alt while clicking on one of the faces in that loop. So like so. You may notice that if you click somewhere in the middle of the face that another face loop is selected. We had meant to select this one going along the top here, but instead we selected one that goes along the top, the bottom, and the center. Forms a more vertical ring as opposed to a horizontal one. In order to select the face loop that we want, hold down Alt and click close to one of the vertical edges that makes up the face loop, like so. Clicking nearer to the horizontal edges than the vertical edges is what caused Blender to select the wrong loop initially. You'll notice that Blender will select the correct loop and deselect the wrong one. If we wanted to have the wrong loop selected in addition to the correct one, we would have to have been holding down Shift while selecting the face loop. So our input would have been Shift, Alt, and left click. With the correct face loop selected, we include the top face in our selection by holding down Shift and left clicking on the top face. All of these faces can be deleted by pressing the delete button. In edit mode, however, the delete button is much more complicated. Here, Blender will ask us what combination of the 3 main elements we want to get rid of. For now, we are only concerned with completely removing these faces, so we'll select Faces. Since we also want to delete the edges that help make up those faces, and not just the faces themselves, it's okay to click on Faces. If instead we were to click on Only Faces, the edges and vertices that made up those faces would remain behind, and we would still have more work to do. We'd have to go into Edge Select mode with 2, and delete them like this. So I'm just going to undo to get back to this point. So yeah. You can observe some of the differences between deleting just faces or choosing only faces. You could try vertices as well, which is the most destructive because each vertice has much more influence in the structure of other faces than an individual edge does. An individual face has even less influence on other faces. So that's why just deleting faces is the least destructive, and deleting vertices is the most destructive because vertices are the most integral to your shape, and edges being the second most. Putting that aside, we are now left with a cube with no top. Let me just show you from the top what that looks like. A new 3D modeler might say that this cube is ready to be exported into a game engine as a simple big cup, but this isn't true at all. The big reason is that faces are only correctly rendered from one side. You cannot have a face that is rendered correctly on the inside of a shape and on the outside. By removing this top face, and all the top faces we've done, we might assume that our side faces will show up correctly no matter what side they're viewed on, but as we have just learned, this cannot be the case. One side of, say, this face will always appear wrong. To view the orientation of faces, click the arrow next to the button containing the 2 circles at the top of the 3D viewport and check Face Orientation. Game engines will render geometry if it's colored blue and won't render geometry if it's colored red. As you can see, the inside of our cube is red, which is good typically as it means the inside of our cube won't be rendered, which would waste processing power. However, in a situation in which we want a face to defy its fundamental properties and act as 2 separate faces, this means that our cup will look bright from the outside, but will look invisible if viewed from the inside. Face orientation not only affects rendering, but also animation and object transformations that we will learn more about in the future. So be sure that all of the geometry that you want to be visible is marked as blue. As a side note, negative scaling flips blue faces to red ones, And that's one of the reasons it should be avoided. So you see if I select everything and I negative scale, you see suddenly our shape turns red, and inside now it will be blue. If you do end up with a face oriented the wrong way, say we don't want this part of the geometry to be shown, you can hold down Alt and press N to bring up the normals menu. To understand normals in this context, think of our line at a 90-degree angle to our faces from the last tutorial. In reality, that line has an arrow at one side. Ideally, the arrow should be pointing away from the inside of the model, which is the case for all of the geometry that is blue. To fix the orientation of the arrows of the red geometry, whose arrows face inward, with the faces selected, click on Flip or Recalculate Outside, although the latter may not work depending on the complexity of your object or the severity of your face orientation issues. So I'd stick to the reliable Flip option. So like so, say this was red for some reason, and if we click on it, Alt and then N to bring up the normals menu, we can go to Flip. Or additionally, since it's pretty clear what the outside is, since the blue parts clearly define the outside of the shape, because there's not that many red faces and it's a very simple shape, you could also select the shape and hit Recalculate Outside. And Alt-A to deselect, and there you go. Good as new. To get our cube back from here, you can enter Edge Mode by pressing 2, Edge Select Mode that is, and then selecting our top edge loop by holding an Alt and left-clicking on an edge in that loop. So I'm going to pick this one. From here, press F to fill in the face. So I'm just going to zoom up here so you can see it. I'm just going to press F, and it's filled it. You can see that the face is blue from the outside, meaning that it's all good. And now we're back to our default cube. If you tried to extrude an edge to cover the hole that we created, you would find that even if done perfectly, there would still be extra edges created. So this method is inefficient, and I'll just go ahead and show that off. So if I pick this one and extrude X, I know this is 2 meters across, so I'm just going to do 2. You can see it's done it the wrong way. So let's do -2 to get it the right way. But even now, even though this looks like the default cube, notice how when I move these other edges, the rest of the shape moves too. But if I move this edge, it's not attached to the shape. And there are things we can do to fix that, but we'll get into that later. For now, and always, the best way to do it is just to select this edge loop and press F to fill. Since all of our faces are blue now, we can confidently turn off the face orientation setting, as face orientation issues can only arise from bad transformations, like a negative scaling. This means that as long as we maintain good practices, we can avoid face orientation issues and keep the setting turned off. And again, just in case you want to toggle this on and off whenever you'd like, go up to the 2 circles at the top of the 3D viewport, click the arrow next to it, and then click Face Orientation. I'm going to leave it off for now since I know that all our faces are blue. To finish up, we'll talk about extruding edges. If we select an edge and extrude it outwards, so if we do this, go with X, just some arbitrary amount, we've made another modeling mistake in the same vein as the previous one. Since one face cannot be visible on both sides of itself, so like before, since there's only one face, one side of this is going to be blue and the other side is going to be red. And so from the top it will appear visible, let's say, and the top it'll be invisible. And it'll look like a weird optical illusion, and it will create problems for you down the road. And it should just be avoided because of those reasons. So as a general rule, we don't do extrusions like this unless we're going to do things, let me just click on face orientation, unless we're going to do things that create a new section to house the red parts of the face. Now that may seem a little confusing, but I'm going to demonstrate what I mean by that. So let's go ahead and create a new part of the shape that will have a new inside area that can contain this red part. And so it won't be visible to the eye and it will be all good. So first thing I'm going to do in creating this new area is I'm going to select these 3 vertices. So 1 to go into vertex select, and I can hold shift and click these other ones. And I'm going to press F to create a new face here, a triangle this time. You'll also notice that this, if we go over to edge mode and we click on this edge, you'll notice that it all moves together as one piece, meaning that there were no extra unnecessary geometry created, like when we extruded the edge earlier. So that's great. Also, since this face right here is now going to be completely covered, I'm just going to delete it. It's bad practice to have additional geometry inside of your model that can't be seen. We'll mess with animation stuff, and we'll mess with texturing and lighting, and it just adds to the poly count. There's a whole bunch of reasons to avoid it, so we're just going to delete it. So I'm going to try and make a stretch face. Select these 3 vertices in vertex select mode, again holding down shift to select multiple points. I press F to fill and create this face, and I'm gonna select this edge, select this other edge, and press F, and now I filled it up and I've managed to make this shape. How can we make this a stretch face? Well, you remember from before, we grab on the X a little bit, say negative 0.5, grab on the Y a little bit, let's call it 0.5, then this face looks okay, but this is a stretch face. It exists too many points at once. It really looks like a plate that kind of bended too badly. So in order to fix that, if we go into vertex select mode and we see where it's bending, you'll notice that it's almost as, you can almost envision as if there was one triangle here and one triangle here. And to make that a reality, you're going to select the 2 vertices that could make a line that could split this face into 2 triangles like we want. And if you press F, it's going to create a new edge, but it's not actually going to cut up the existing geometry. This face remains 1. And again, this is also a great time to mention, Shift Z is wireframe mode. Yeah. I wasn't even meaning to mention that. So F won't work because it will add it, but it won't actually cut through the shape we already have. To do that, we need to press J. And now you'll see that it's not bending at any kind of weird angles anymore. All the weirdness has been sorted out by this line. If we want to go back from here at any point, we want our stretch face back for some reason, you can click on our edge and click dissolve edges, and that will give our stretch face back. Dissolved edges is going to remove the edge but not destroy anything that the edge is part of, if possible. If we just do delete edges, it's going to take out both of those faces because that edge was a part of both of those faces. Dissolve edges actually merges the shapes into one within the context that that edge no longer exists. So for us, that will restore our stretch face. Oh, look at us though, clearing challenges from several videos ago with just a few clicks. The faces, thank you for unstretching them, and I thank you very much for tuning in. Next time, we are going to start our first project. It's going to be a short one. It's going to be fun. Yeah, take care.